I remember thinking, what must it be like to be Emperor of Rome? To know that one's face on coins, on monuments, painted and sculptured, is known to all the world. And here, so close to me that I could feel the reciprocal warmth of his skin, was the original of that world-famous face, not bronze or marble, but soft flesh and bone like me, like any other man. And I wondered, what is it like to be the center of the world? For the first time, I experienced ambition. It came as a revelation. I have never admitted to anyone that in my first encounter with Constantius, all that I could think was how much I should like the dominion of this earth.
Gore Vidal is one of America's most successful and distinguished writers. He also lives in a personal cloud of outrageous legend. The dominion of this earth may have eluded him, but he's certainly scaled every pinnacle in the range of social ambition. His penthouse in Rome and his house on the Mediterranean are the fruits of a career that began meteorically and has continued in a glitter of notoriety. After the early books, which first brought him to the public eye, came a group of highly praised historical novels, which sold in their millions. But it was Myra Breckenridge, and now another sexual fantasy, Myron, that confirmed Vidal's place as the enfant terrible of the respectable American literary scene. He didn't exactly have a standing start. His family was at the heart of American politics, and this connection was to be continued in later years by a stroke of chance. Through his mother's remarriage, Jacqueline Bouvier, later Kennedy, became his stepsister. His father was in Roosevelt's cabinet, and Vidal Jr. was soon getting a taste of success.
Naturally, I wanted to be a politician, but unfortunately I was born a writer. And I would not say that I exactly have had the life I wanted. I've done as well as I could, I think, but no, I wanted to be the president.
I don't know if you know that the civil law against sodomy goes back 1,500 years to the Emperor Justinian, who in his code wrote that this terrible act against nature should be outlawed, as everyone knows it is a principal cause of earthquake. I think this explains the West Coast and the San Andreas Fault.
Some girl came up to me the other day and said, how does it feel to be a myth? I said, no, I said it feels legendary, I said.
Vidal has in no way discouraged the legend, and America has richly rewarded her sharpest critic. He is playing out a role for which he appears typecast.
I am, as the Italians say, in my 50th year. I'm still 49, but on the continent here, they say you are in your 50th year. And it's been 30 years since my first book, and suddenly it was sort of a nostalgic time. Everybody wanted to come and pay a call and see what I was thinking about and look at the decay. Publication came, I think, much too early. My first novel, Willow War, was written when I was 19 in the Second World War in the Pacific, showing how much I had to do with the war. I had plenty of time to write a novel. And then my third book, written when I was 21, The City and the Pillar, published in 1948, was indeed a notorious book. And I did find myself, as they say, suddenly well-known, and not necessarily in a very good way, since it was a book that greatly shocked many people at the time. And so thus was I launched rather earlier than most writers. And
Why
here
do you
we
think
are.
it was quite so shocking to so many people?
Well, it was the first novel that had been published in England or America, or anywhere as far as I know, that dealt very openly with homosexuality as being a perfectly normal sexual activity. Until then, all the books that had touched upon this were exotic. If you had a homosexual well, you almost never had a protagonist. There'd be a minor character, and it would always be a ballet dancer or a hairdresser or something like that, and it would be somebody quite effeminate. And I was dealing with two all-American boys, two young athletes, one of whom falls in love with the other. And this was very, very shocking. But of course, this was the whole, now, 30 years later, it's rather apparent this was the whole point to the United States, to this manly society, this machismo society, was that it was essentially bisexual, and that the frontier, which is our greatest myth, the cowboy myth, was really a largely homosexual one. And the summer, I remember it came out in March of 1948, and I came over here right immediately thereafter. Met Tennessee Williams for the first time. But I remember Tennessee saying, "Oh," he said, "I worry about Gore. You see, he's got successful so young, and he'll be cut off from life." And he does that little laugh of his, which is a bit of schadenfreude. And I remember thinking at the time, well, my God, what are you saying? Because I've been telling Tennessee, who was then 38, I suppose, I thought very old. I kept telling him, you know, you really ought to read a newspaper or a book. That his celebrity was so great, his fame was really so great then, that he was cut off. I haven't got anything to write with. It's very interesting. I've been writing for 30 years, and I've never bought a pen, and I've never lacked for a pen. What do you think that means? It may work. Theft.
Vidal maintains his own contact with the realities of American life by annual lecture tours, book signings, and interviews, coating his liberal message with the sugar of a personal publicity campaign.
In Rome, in the course of my life, I have seen three types of success that have attracted me. One was Mussolini in 1939. I was about 13 then. I was here with a bunch of boys from the school I went to. And I remember seeing him standing on the balcony of the Piazza Venezia with the people cheering. I must say I was a proper little fascist. I mean, it was the most exciting display I'd ever seen. The comic possibilities of it had not yet occurred to me. And I remember thinking, now that is rather startling, the power of this man over that audience. I just miss Hitler, who had just been in and out of town. I'm afraid I would probably have had the same reaction then. That was power naked. And then I saw great sort of theatrical, worldly power in Tennessee, whose success with Streetcar Named Desire is, I think, the greatest success of any writer in my lifetime. I mean, just the whole world was ravished by his work. So I looked at Tennessee and I thought, that's quite something, you know, that's what he's done. Every country in the world this play is being performed. And then the kind of success and power that most appealed to me at the time, being a Puritan, was George Santayana. And he was living in the convent of the Blue Nuns, which is sort of half a hospital and half a home. And I would go and see Santayana, who was then nearly 80. And we would talk, and he'd written the last Puritan book, which had much appealed to me. So suddenly for me, Rome were the three symbols, first of Mussolini, then of my meeting and long friendship with Tennessee, and then these sort of tutorial visits I would have with Santayana, who had no worldly possessions. By 1952, I was really broke. I had bought a house up the Hudson River for very little money, but a very big house. I remember Carl Van Vechten, famous old American writer with a private income, came to see me and he said, you remind me of Scott Fitzgerald. He was a friend of mine too, and he also bought a big house in Maryland, and he couldn't afford it either, he said, looking at me to see whether I would take to the bottle or end up at MGM. I did both and survived. Until about 52 or 3, you could be a middlingly successful novelist, because except for The City and the Pillar, my books didn't sell very well. But you could live from it. Suddenly in the early 50s, those marginally successful writers like myself were done for because book sales just went down. Everybody started to watch television. So I had never seen a television play, and I decided that this was the way to make a living. From there I went to the stage, to the movies. So I spent really 10 years, from 54 to 64, in which the only prose I wrote were essays. I think it was then that I gave my definition, which I think I've stolen from somebody, but I now claim it as my own, of commercialism. It is doing well that which should not be done at all. And I learned how to do that in order to make myself financially independent so that I would never again have to worry about making a living. And by 64, at least until the current collapse of the dollar, I was able to do that. I often read that what a dreadful person Gore Vidal must be because he doesn't seem to believe in love. Well, I don't even know what the word means. I mean, I know what I think it means, but I know that they don't know what it means. Everybody is writing about real people in quotidianal situations. And I think because everybody else does it so much better than I, and everybody else is so much warmer and more compassionate than I, and more loving, I leave that to Irwin Shaw, Margaret Drabble, many writers, good and bad, to do that sort of thing. And I deal with what interests me, which is power, I suppose, the machinations of the people who govern, and lust, which of course interests me, as it does everybody.
And the past?
Well, the past is lovely because the past is complete. It's all there. Suddenly, the modern buildings ceased, and on either side he saw dark canyons a dozen feet lower than the street, and he could see the ruins of the Forum. Pale, familiar shapes of broken buildings, shattered columns and arches, an occasional massive section of some government building still intact. He walked slowly, quite alone, thinking of all the bloody happenings that had taken place among those broken rocks, the center once of a world of fine law and some order, an age of silver untarnished by that Christian blight which had coincided, somewhat suspiciously he'd always thought, with the Dark Ages. The Roman Empire had 400 or 500 quite good years. Everything works much faster now. The British Empire had, 30 years, 50 years maybe, if you want to start it with Disraeli or the East India Company. The American Empire really got going in 1900 when we picked a war with Spain, which gave us the Philippines and got us into the Pacific. So we've had really 70 years of empire, of which there are only about 20 at the top. And now we've begun our collapse, which I think is very good for character. It's been extremely good for the British to lose their empire and suddenly become just the cultural center of the earth. And I think now that we've lost Asia, never having had it, but we think we had Asia. As we lost China, we've now lost South Vietnam. It's been very good for our character. That will give more money to the ballet and be a civilized, largish nation. It was both more and less than he had expected. He had not anticipated such vastness. The ruins of the various basilica and public baths startled him with their unaesthetic massiveness. They seemed too ponderous, too calculated to overawe. He wondered what a savage must have thought coming from the foggy green forests of Germany to this stern behemoth of a city, the center of the world. And he tried to think of it the way it had been, and failed completely as he always did. The Forum was altogether too much like Times Square on a Saturday night when he stared at it very hard, trying to imagine it as it was, Cicero and Nerva, Catullus and Julius, but he got only a double exposure of the jostling, noisy, sinister New York crowd against these delicate columns which contained only sky and summer air, tall umber walls emerging from green, unexcavated hills and cliffs where coins and urns and marble heads lay buried in subterranean ruins, smothered in the fine brown earth of violent and unremembered days. I believe all history is fiction. And in a way, I suppose one might say that all fiction is history. After all, most novels are about who went off with someone else's wife last summer at Sussex University, and this is considered a very important subject for a novel. It's considered a little excessive to write about a Roman emperor. I mean, that means that one runs the risk of being trivial when the important things are, as we know, life among academics on either side of the Atlantic, or experiments. But for me, it's enormously attractive because, as I say, you filter it through your own imagination. You do it in your own image. Each generation writes history in its own way.
Are you personally very nostalgic? Do you keep photographs?
No, I don't keep anything. We used to have a marvelous racket in America that you would give your papers to a university and you get a large tax deduction. Like Richard Nixon, I did all of that. However, I didn't do it illegally because after '69 you couldn't do it anymore. But I shipped out everything, so all my past is sitting in a university in cartons. And these young academics who go there to write books about me, they go through these files, and I hope they enjoy themselves. I keep nothing but a few photographs in the bathroom of myself at an earlier time. The first of the bathroom gallery shows me at the age of 25, looking rather anxious. I've just bought a large house in the country and cannot afford it. Here you see the young author of Willowaw at the age of 19, still in uniform. Here, above the bathtub, in the place of honor, are the debates with William Buckley in 1968. He is a well-known right-wing commentator whose name seldom passes my lips. Next in our bathroom series, I'm running for Congress, standing there with Jack Kennedy, who has just been nominated for president. We're meeting in Hyde Park. And below, there's another shot of Kennedy and myself in the middle of that campaign. And then below, Harry Truman came into the district to speak on my behalf. And we're all looking terribly, terribly pleased, facing defeat. I've been accused of excessive narcissism by having these photographs of myself, but it's really to remind me, I've really got to start losing weight now, and I've got to do something about the chin. Is it perhaps time to have this finally lifted? Has it come now? And I do this while shaving. When Nixon became president, he said that he would write everybody in Who's Who asking them for guidance. It would be a form letter, he said, but there would be a line or two complimenting the recipient on his great contributions to American culture. I waited and waited, and this is what I got in the mail. I must say, when I saw this letter, I said to myself, either this is the wittiest administration in history, or we're in trouble.
Most of Vidal's work is done not in Rome, but at Ravello on the Sorrentine coast. Amid lemon groves and vineyards, 2,000 feet above the sea, his house is improbably perched above a precipice, the ideal spot, as he would say, to observe the decline of the West.
It's very odd. A few years ago, one of those magazines that ask you silly questions like, what is the most beautiful place you ever saw? Said, what is the most beautiful place you ever saw? And I said, it's this particular coast of Amalfi, as viewed from the hill of the Cimbrone, which is where we are now. So by some irony, here I am.
Come on, let's go. Let's go.
I'm a socialist, not St. Francis. And there is no such thing as unilateral socialism. It is something that everybody must partake of, or nobody. My conscience is somewhat appeased by being a political activist and also by financing for 5 years with Dr. Spock, the People's Party in the United States. My life is in two separate compartments. One is being political and being public, being a social ameliorist, and the other is writing. I make a separation, and you see this side of my life, which is where I work, and I'm really quite remote here, as you can see, on the side of the hill. He looked about him at the sharp brown rocks. There were no beaches here, only cliffs and rocks, and at the town center, the ravine and the river, all contained by wharves, the focus of Amalfi, which, like some great pink amphitheater, was fanned out over the green and umber hills on top of which dead castles, relics of the Crusades, of the busy bold Normans, rose in solemn silhouette against the sky. It was all very lovely, he decided sourly, giving up the idea of suicide for the moment.
When did you first come to Ravello, and what sort of impression did it make on you?
I think I was here in 1939. Thought it was very beautiful, as indeed it is. I came here seriously, I suppose, in 1948, when Tennessee Williams and I took a Jeep and drove all around Italy. And I kept coming back over the years.
What are your working methods?
Well, after 30 years, the books somehow get done. I'm not quite sure how it happened. It's a marvelous story of Aldous Huxley about a man, very highbrow, literary figure, who would invariably go into these sort of fits, and he'd wake up in the morning, and there would be pages and pages by this dreadful lady novelist called Pearl Bel-Airs. Little boy saying to his grandfather, the Earl, "Can I take my teddy bear to heaven?" Well, I sometimes feel a bit like this Aldous Huxley character when I suddenly look and I find that I've finished a book. Somehow or other it gets written. Books like Burr and Julian and 1876, which I'm working on now, require a great deal of history and require a great deal of reading. So I'm constantly reading for the books. Myra Breckinridge certainly was one glorious aria, which I wrote in a few weeks' time. And suddenly this dread voice was in my head. I am Myra Breckinridge, whom no man will ever possess. Clad only in garter belt and one dress shield, I held off the entire elite of the Trobriand Islanders, a race who possess no words for why or because. Wielding a stone axe, I broke the arms, the limbs, the balls of their finest warriors, my beauty blinding them, as it does all men, unmanning them, in the way that King Kong was reduced to a mere simian whimper by beauteous Fay Ray, whom I resemble, left three-quarter profile, if the key light is no more than 5 feet high during the close shot. I don't know where Myra came from. Myra's taste in movies are not my taste in movies. But she was inexorable. And that book, that awful expression, wrote itself. Well, it practically did. I really was like the Huxley character each day, wondering what Myra would do and roaring with laughter as this thing presented itself to me. As you know, it is the story of a man who decides to become a woman, who then falls in love with a girl and decides to become a man again. Myron, which succeeds in a way, we must never use that terrible word, is a sequel to, but is Further Adventures of Myra Breckinridge, just published now, was very difficult. Whereas Myra appeared in one glorious rush, this caused me a great deal of difficulty. I suppose because so much of it is Myron, her other self, and it's that extraordinary thing. He's a very dull, square, virtuous American. Myra Breckinridge lives. Like World War II hero General Douglas MacArthur, I have returned. Yet colorful as corn-cob pipe-sucking dugout Doug was, his panache was nothing compared to that of the second husband of his first wife, Louise, the immortal Lionel Atwill, who stunningly outacted Errol Flynn in Captain Blood, 1935. It is a curious coincidence that when Errol Flynn made his tipsy way to the John on a certain sad day in 1959, he echoed Louise Atwill's husband when he declared to his bibulous chums, amongst them legend has it, the nubile Beverly Adland, "I shall return." But Errol did not return. An hour later, he was discovered on the bedroom floor, cold as a mackerel. Well, the movies took over where the bestsellers had previously, in the previous century. A book like Uncle Tom's Cabin or any of Dickens would have probably started life as a large MGM movie. Well, first came the book, then the movies imitated a kind of popular fiction, sometimes good but mostly bad. Then what is happening now with most of the bestsellers, certainly in the United States, and I suppose in England too, they overlap. The bestsellers, by and large, seem to me to read like remembered movies. I mean, when I read the works of, I don't know, who are some of the people, Jacqueline Suzanne, I keep thinking of very old films, and I always look at the age of the author, and then I think back, because I'm pretty encyclopedic on every movie I've ever seen. I've seen quite a few in the last 40 years. And I can really reconstruct from the writer's age which pictures he or she saw and which ones affected them. So you'll be in the middle of a love scene, and I say, yes, Mrs. Miniver, yes, that tender, gracious, condescending top drawer but one smile. I know that scene, you know. Or another scene I'll look at and I'll say, you see, I know. Leon Uris is the right age to write that. And even good writers, relatively good writers like Norman Mailer, reflect very much the films that they saw. I mean, I don't think Norman's whole sort of public persona could not have existed had there been no John Garfield for him to imitate.
There's an implication there that films are a more intense food for the imagination than life itself.
Alas, I think they are. You see, unlike Myra, I'm not an enthusiast of the movies. I mean, I was raised on them, much affected, as everybody is, by those things seen in childhood, which are, in a way, more vivid than books can be. We now have yet another generation which isn't raised so much on movies as it is on television. And they really disturb me because they can neither read nor write, and many of them can't talk. I find this going around the universities in America, and I find that a bit alarming. I see no future at all for the novel from the point of view of the audience. It's the audience that's dying, not the novelist. The audience gets smaller and smaller with each passing year. There are fewer bookstores in the United States now than there were in 1875, 100 years ago. The reading public, I think, is substantially smaller. The serious reading public, never large, is getting smaller all the time. So I'm not particularly sanguine. I think every epoch picks the games it wants to play. The novel is only 300 years old. On a larger scale, I don't think it makes any difference in a given period whether, to put it in English terms, you're a Harold Wilson or you're a Angus Wilson. In the long run, sorry, Harold, but in the long run, I think that it would probably have been much better to have been Angus Wilson, because at least he left something worthwhile that you can touch, look at, and the few people who can still read without moving their lips will take a certain pleasure in him. I think the political careerists like Harold Wilson or Gerald Ford are pretty irrelevant in a period.
You mentioned earlier that there were three kinds of basic success: the worldly literary successes like Tennessee Williams, the philosopher like Santayana, or the demagogue like Mussolini. Which of the three, if any, do you envy?
Oh, I've never envied anybody. That's why at times I've been annoyed, let us say, when I thought that those who write book chat preferred, let us say, Norman Mailer to me. But I don't envy Norman. I just think the people who write book chat are idiots, as indeed most of them are. So I've never held, I've never looked at anybody and said, oh my God, if I could only be that person, or why is he having a much better time of it than I am? For one thing, I think I've had a very good run, and I think it would be tempting fate for me to start complaining and be envious of anybody. Of the three varieties of worldly success, I think I was drawn to all three, and have ended up by being whatever it is that I am, which is, on the one hand, politically active, a demagogue at times, on the other hand, quite withdrawn from everything and everybody, not quite as pure as Santayana, but as reflective, I think, in a way, certainly out of the stream here in Ravello. And then the sort of successful worldly writer like Tennessee, I suppose I am that in a degree, but not by choice. It just seems to have been my fate. Whether people find you interesting or not as a writer has nothing to do with calculation, as far as I can tell. Either they do or they don't. And if you don't, if you are highly critical of the period in which you live, and the period in which you live takes to you enormously, you do look in the mirror sometimes and worry, what am I doing wrong? It's Caliban, I fear.